Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. In today's video, I want to do a different one. What causes performance issues in the Microsoft Flight Simulator? Without further ado, let's get straight into it. So here we are at Teesside International Airport. This is near Middlesbrough in the UK. Further north, but not as far as Scotland. Near Newcastle, but a bit further to the south. It's not too busy of an airport, it's quite a quiet one in real life as well. I've got no scenery here installed, freeware or payware. Yeah. What I want to say is that I've not chosen like somewhere like Manchester or London because there's more chance of anomalies occurring with maybe a different volume of traffic on the roads or a different volume of trees being generated. It's all random in the sim. And that will create a lot of anomalies. And I'm not saying you won't get them here, but you've got less chance of having anomalies here, so it's better to test your performance somewhere like this that isn't insanely quiet, but it's quiet enough that it's not going to produce a load of anomalies like that. But yeah, I don't want to waste any time, so let's get straight into it. Now I've explained that, why I'm here and not in London. So the first thing I want to go over is the most obvious, your graphics settings. Feel free to pause the video to look at mine. Specs are in the description as well for my PC. Here are my graphics settings. Just pretty self-explanatory what they do. They increase or decrease the level of quality of the world in the image. Now, I've found these settings work best for me. To get the best visual to FPS level. Yeah. Now, so you can see we've got 60 FPS here. We're using 6.9 gigabytes of VRAM, using about 14.5 gigabytes of system RAM, and we're using about 30 to 40% of the GPU, 35 to 40. The GPU is going up randomly a bit, but it's generally at 35% to 40%, and then the CPU is at 12% generally as well. So keep a note of this. You might want to screenshot this or something. As we go through, this is all going to change weirdly, and I'm going to explain why. So you can see we're at 60 FPS. Let's focus on the FPS for now. D3, D12, and then you see 60 FPS here. Now, we've got 60 FPS solid here. We're not moving around. We've just got 60 FPS solid looking at the runway. We've got a bit of an airport in view. We've got a load of trees in view. We've got a load of mountains in the background. It's not quiet in the general sense, but there's no traffic around or anything. And I've purposely not done that. It's purposely no traffic. So if I pan the camera around like this, not much changes. I'm not getting any FPS drops. The RAM and VRAM are sort of going up a little bit, but really it's nothing major. It's really not affecting our performance at all that we need to worry about. So you can see that my graphics settings are probably at a decent level. But the first thing I want to touch on, what if I change the terrain level of detail to maximum 400 from 100? Remember, it was on 100. If you took the screenshots or pause the video, you'll see that was on 100. Terrain level of detail is known to be one of the worst hoggers of FPS performance in the sim. So let's see what happens if we crank that up to 400 now. Do you notice any visual increase in the sim? That's a question you need to ask yourself, because all our eyes may see different things. We'll see similar things, but it'll be mostly, you might see someone sees like 100 trees and then someone else sees 50 trees, Weird things like that. So, does your eye see any increase in visual? Look at the sim, not the numbers. Now, I can see that the numbers have sort of changed. Our RAM has gone up to about 15.3 gigs. 15.5, it's rising, it's a bit unstable, but it's fine, it's not going to affect FPS, or it's not affecting the FPS. The main aim is to get good FPS here. GPU, that's pretty much the same. The CPU's gone up a bit in usage, so something's gone on. It's definitely more intensive, but nothing too major. The CPU's only gone up like 3-4% in utilization. The video memory on my graphics card VRAM has gone up. It's gone to 8.4 from 6.9, so that's quite a big jump. So if you only had an 8 gig GPU right now, you may be struggling for FPS because it'll be overflowing into virtual memory. If you know what that is, I'm not going to get into that though. It's not a computing lesson. So it's definitely got more intensive, but the FPS hasn't changed, so it's really not a big major issue at the moment for me. So what if we pan the camera around now? Yeah, as you see, stutter. There was a little stutter I felt, and you could see that the frames dropped from 60 up to about 54 for a split second. That's because it's unstable. Essentially, what terrain level of detail does. Alright, so let's go back to the question I asked you before. Do you notice any visual increase? And the answer to that question is probably no. Now, it might be that you notice something, but the chances are you're just seeing that. It's not actually there. This is because terrain level of detail isn't what you think. It's not increasing the quality of the image of terrain. It's actually increasing the distance at which the terrain loads in. So if you can see, there's I'm just going to change it over this way because it's a bit more easier to illustrate. You can see the mountains over there to that level. Take a note of this. Maybe screenshot if you need to. If I go and change that terrain level of detail to the lowest value, which is 10 right now, and save it, you will see that we can see a lot less trees, and the hills don't look as good. Well, we can't see as much of the hills. It's not that they don't look as good, it's that you can't see as much of the hills. And you can also see that the runway here has gone a bit blurry, and it just looks very weird now. There's a lot less trees being rendered in, and the textures look really weird. They look a bit blurry, as I've said before. This is because it's doing exactly what I told you. It's just determining when it wants to load those textures in. See, if I go close to the runway now, you find that the texture suddenly sort of pops into place as I get closer and closer and closer. And you can also see that we can see more trees in the distance. Trees are being loaded in. This is because it's not the quality, it's the rate at which it gets rendered in. And this is what many people are getting confused on. So make a note of that. Terrain level of detail isn't the quality, it's the rate at which it gets loaded in. And as you can see by the RAM and the video memory and the CPU usage, it's all gone down because there's not as much for the game to render in. We've gone from 8.1 whatever gigabytes of VRAM we were using to 6.6 to from the highest level of terrain to the lowest level of terrain, and that's a big increase. That's 1 to 2 gigabytes of VRAM which you've used just by going to 400, and it's not increased the quality in any way. It's just increased when it loads in. Now, you might be asking, why did I set this to 100 as the sweet spot? This is because, to my testing, 100 gives you the balance between visual quality, but it's not quality. It's visual like appeal, visual appeal. Or what I don't know what the word I should be saying is, but it's basically I want to see trees in the distance to make it more realistic, but I don't want to have it insane that it's loading in things which I can't even see from where I'm sat, but it's still loading them in. And that's going to have an impact on my FPS and performance overall. It's going to make your system a lot more used, which is going to reduce lifetime of your computer or whatever machine you're using. So, but yours might not be 100 because this is all going to be based off PC specs as well. Because again, I'm not saying that hardware is the be all and end all. Like you could have a 3060 and someone else can have a 3070 and you could be getting the same if not different FPS values which don't really correlate to how much you've spent on the GPU or how good that GPU is. But if you went, for example, from a GT 730 to an RTX 3070, that would be a decent performance uplift because you're going from a very old GPU to a fairly modern GPU, which is of a decent tier as well. So yeah, I'll do more on hardware at the end because I think it's the least important aspect of what I want to get at today. So that's terrain level of detail. Any questions, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to answer them. I'm not a busy man. Well, I am, but I can always answer questions. Always got evenings free. Next thing I want to go on to is objects level of detail. See, I've got mine on 100 as well. That I found was my sweet spot. You can have a mess with your settings to see what the sweet spot is from visual quality to performance. Mine is 100, yours may be different, but you need to test this yourself. But most people, I will admit, will be 100 because that's the balance. Like, there isn't an insane amount of quality increase from 100 to 120 or anything, so, you know, if you couldn't reach 200, but it really is going up in 100 increments. So if I was you, I'd just go to the nearest 100. That's, well, round down to the nearest 100, because if you round up, you may find that you're getting stability issues. So I'd always round down to the nearest 100 on your terrain and object level of detail. But let's see, object level of detail. Let's crank that up to 200. See what happens to the numbers in the top left-hand corner of the screen. And let's also see what happens to our stability of our frame rate. See, it's not too bad here. It's not too bad. It did stutter a little, but it was really unnoticeable. But really, objects level detail isn't going to kick in here. Here's why. I know this is gonna, these things. See these things here? These are objects, aren't they? If I look at these, the quality isn't great, is it? Let's change it to the lowest setting. Does the quality get worse? Answer my question. Does the quality get worse? Answer, no it doesn't. It's the same, exactly the same. But what happens if I go further away from this object? See, do you see that? Look at that little blue knob. That little blue knob to the right of the object thing. I think it's a fire hose. To the very right, there's a knob on the whole thing. Look at that. Keep your eyes on that as I move away. Disappears. Keep moving away. See, the fire hose has now disappeared. Now let's stay at this exact position. What happens if I put it to the maximum object level of detail now? As you can see, the hose is still there if you can see in the distance. This is again because it's the level, it's the rate at which it gets loaded in, when it gets loaded in, not the actual quality of the object. And this is something which needs to be addressed. Now, object level detail isn't so much of a hogger in performance in an area like this, but if you head over to Heathrow or something, you're going to notice it. But nevertheless, have a mess around with it, see what works for you. You can go up to 200 in that one, so I would go up in 50 increments for that one. Round to the nearest 50, round down if possible, but if not, then round up. But round down if possible, it's going to give you the best stability to visual quality. My sweet spot is 100, so I left it at 100. Again, have a mess. Next thing. I'm not going to go over every setting because it'd make the video way too longer than it already will be. Off-screen terrain pre-caching. Now I've got that on ultra maximum setting. Now I can't really tell you what this does without telling you what it does exactly. I can't give you a clue, I can only really tell you what it does. So essentially what this does is it loads in, it determines how much of an angle things load in, like objects and buildings and trees, all that stuff, cars, whatever. If it's on within your if it's on ultra, it will be loading everything in your 360 degrees turning radius. So when I turn, it's not going to have to load in a load of objects. When I turn, it's just already going to have them loaded in. This is on ultra, it'll load everything in your 360 degree viewing radius. But if it's on a lower setting, say low, it'll only render in things which you're looking straight in front at. It's only loaded in what I'm looking at right now on the screen, or what's right in front of me. Now, how much it loads in depends on what setting you've got it on. The lowest one will load in the lowest amount, the medium will do some, and then high, and then ultra. You probably get the gist. If I turn my camera now, though, okay, it's not actually made a difference here. It's because there's not much around us, but if I go further up, though, yeah, it's very hard to illustrate this setting. That's why I'm a bit jittery on how I'm saying it, because it's very hard to explain. But essentially, the lower the setting, the worse stability you'll have on this setting. It's stupid. If you have it on low, you're more likely to get a stutter when panning the camera, like for example turn it left and right, than if you had it on ultra. This makes no sense, I know, but it's the sim. This is why I wanted to do this video, because the sim makes no sense. It's very hard to illustrate here. But essentially, it's going to be more stuttery the lower setting you have it on. So it's loading in less objects. In fact, yeah, as you can see, the cars are flickering a bit. This is because they aren't in my 360 degree turning radius. And yeah, they aren't really causing a big FPS issue because it's not a very busy area. But the more objects you have around you, the worse the hit will be to your FPS. So yeah, I recommend you to stick this in ultra, whatever computer you have. unless your computer really is struggling with this setting because you've tested it so many times it's all leading to this setting. But have it on the highest setting you can have this setting on, because it will increase stress on the computer a bit, because it's going to be loading in more when you're on the screen. But it's also going to reduce the lag you'll have when moving the camera around. So yeah, higher setting the better. Now, those are the three main culprits I wanted to talk about today for graphics settings. Everything else is really just, you can have a mess with the rest. They aren't really major things, I don't think. Nothing worth making the video even longer than it already is about. However, I do want to touch on NVIDIA DLSS frame generation. Now, this is natively only supported on 4000 NVIDIA GPUs. As of the time of recording, those are the latest generations, so they may also be on the 50 series as well, but they're not out yet, so I can't confirm. But of course, you can also have this via mods and maybe even use lossless scaling, which basically uses frame generation. Not exactly, but it does basically use it. If you have this on, this is going to really impact your frame rate. You'll find we've had 60 FPS solid at this airport. If I turn this off, do we still get 60 FPS solid? I have a really weird feeling we will, because it's such a quiet airport and my computer's good enough. But you can see that the GPU utilization has gone up. It's now at 60%, and it was on. Let me just do it again. I should have told you to look at it before, but I didn't, so I'll change it again. Frame generation is now on. You can see we're using 20%, about 20% less of the GPU's performance, power. And this is because it doesn't need to render as much frames, because frame generation is rendering way more frames than the actual GPU itself can handle. This is NVIDIA's Smart AI. However, you may think, oh yes, I'm going to put this on and then I can have it on max settings. No, that's not how it works. NVIDIA frame generation actually increases the amount of video memory or VRAM that your GPU uses. Now, I have 12 gigabytes, so it's not so impactful on my GPU because I've got enough. But if you have 8 gigabytes or less, this is where you will notice that you may have to sacrifice. And yeah, it uses a lot more VRAM. If you're at London Heathrow by any builds and you're max settings with frame gen on, the chances are you're going to spill way over 8 gigs. You're probably going to spill over 10 gigs as well. So, and at that point, something happens. Now, what happens is you'll get a weird bit of screen tearing. But it'll be weird. It'll be trying to calculate frames, but it can't render them. So you'll be missing out on frames. So the image ends up lagging a bit. And I don't mean lag as in stutter. I mean that the image literally cuts off. Like, trust me, you can't play when the image cuts off. Yeah. How much VRAM do we use with DLSS off? Frame generation. See, we're using a little less VRAM, but because this isn't a major busy area, it's not as impactful. 6.5, and we're using about, what, 6.8 before? It's around there. Let's have a look. About 7 gigs, 6.8, 6.9, so it's about 500 megs here, but usually it's about a good 1-2 gigabytes at busier airports, especially with scenery installed for them. So that is something to be aware of. And I'm just if you crank up your settings to the max, the chances are you will find that your VRAM will spill. But I don't think it's going to happen here because it's such a quiet area that it's not going to be so impactful. Let's see, cockpit, does it do it in the cockpit? No, it doesn't even do it in the cockpit. Yeah, I'm sorry, but if you're at Heathrow and you do this, you'll find what I mean. very easily. I may even do a separate video to illustrate this and link it in the description. But yeah, it will basically cut off frames and make the image cut off like a bit of a... It's worse than screen tearing, but it's similar. Anyway, let's put the settings back to how they were. Another thing is your anti-aliasing. That's going to affect performance, but that's self-explanatory. That's nothing unique to the sim. Frame gen isn't unique to the sim really, but I feel like people are more likely to mess up with it in this game, so I explained it. DirectX version DX11 is more stable, but DX12 is what you need for frame generation, so that's why I'm using DX12. That's the only reason I'm using it, is because of frame generation. Got to use it. Well, that's graphics settings done with. What else? Hardware. In fact, no, I'll get hardware last. So, what type of aircraft you use will affect FPS performance. Same as how logically you'd think that the airport you're at would change the performance, because if you have a scenery airport and you have a non-scenery airport, chances are the scenery airport's going to use a lot more resources, and it will use your FPS. It will decrease your FPS so much, which may make it less enjoyable. But aircraft does the same. If you're in a little Cessna and then you go to fly the Phoenix A320, you'll find that you'll take a bit of a hit. This is usually quite a big hit, to be fair. Usually about 20 FPS or so, maybe less, maybe more. Depends on where you are in the world. Even if you're in this view right now and you're not in the aircraft, you'll still take a hit on FPS. As you see, I've got the PMDG 737 down there. That's quite an intensive aircraft, but I'm still getting good performance because my computer can handle it. And my graphics settings are balanced enough that it's smooth. And the visual quality looks great as well. But if I stuck a little Cessna there, you may find that my GPU, CPU, RAM usage and all that may be a bit reduced because it doesn't need to use as much resources. Simple. Now, PMDG to Phoenix, I do think the Phoenix has a lot more detail in it, so it doesn't take more performance hit than the PMDG does. So do take note of that, but it's not going to be like night and day. Another thing is the weather. So if we're here in the weather now, take a look at those numbers and the utilizations, maybe just screenshot that whole top left of the screen to see the numbers and statistics. If I stick clouds to absolute bonkers, let's see, let's do overcast. It's going to have a slight FPS hit when you first do it, but once it renders in, you'll see, it's alright. It's generally alright now. Let me turn off frame generation. It'll give you more of an insight on what I'm on about. And do this. I'm trying to make it as easy to explain as possible. And yes, you did just see me increase the terrain LODs and things. So if we stick overcast on now, as you can see, it's a bit jittery here and there, but it's generally fine. But we are getting a bit of FPS hit, and that's just because it's the weather. If I stick rain on, it's going to be a lot different. we're not getting solid 60 anymore. It's a bit stuttery here and there, and this is just because of the weather, you know. You can still see the buildings and things, so it still has to render in all these things, but it's also got to render the rain in, so that's going to have a hit, isn't it? And so it does make a hit, you know. You'd probably have known that, but it does make a hit. But what if I just decided to go bonkers with the clouds and, you know, just put overcast, yeah, put that on the max. Have a look over this way, you know. So if I look over this way, I'm getting 60 FPS solid. But you got to think about it, it's not really rendering in anything, is it? You can't see anything, so it can't render anything on the screen because you can't see anything. Whereas if I look this way, you find that I'm getting a little less FPS because it has to load the plane in and the building in, and it's got to render more in. It's using more resources. So it's not necessarily worse the weather, the worse FPS. It's how much you're rendering in, and this is the issue. It's how much you're rendering in which causes the biggest FPS issues. It's not the quality of the image. It's the rendering. If I change my resolution to 1080p, for example, in fact, no, let's change to the lowest resolution for illustrative purposes. Keep change, Jesus Christ. Yeah. So here's the image. I don't know how that's going to look on the video. But here's the image. You know, it's not really done anything. You know, it's still stuttering, even though it's a really bad quality image. It's still stuttering a bit. Why? Because I've got it on the max terrain and objects level of detail. So, really, resolution isn't a major thing. It's more how much is rendering in. You know, this is the lesson. It's not necessarily quality. It's how much it renders in. That's how the sim is made for some reason. It's how much renders in, and not how good things look. So I hope people have learned something from this video. It's not all about quality and the maximum settings. It's about the balance and what each setting actually does. Not just assuming that ultra's the best and low's the worst. It's the same with grasses and bushes, actually. You might find, why the hell do I have trees and grasses and bushes on low and medium with the system I have? Why? This is because it's not the quality of the grasses and bushes. For example, if I go over to the grasses and bushes, see these bushes here. Here's some bushes. Yeah, you can see there's a few bushes here and there. They don't look the best, but they look alright. If I crank these settings up to the maximum, ultra, you may see there's slightly more bushes and trees being rendered in. This is again because it's how much it renders in, not the quality. Has the quality increased on these trees? I don't think it has. So, yeah, what's the point on honking some FPS when you just don't need to? What's the point in using more resources than you need to for no visual uplift? There's just no point at all in doing that. So, the lesson to take away is, yes, learn what graphics settings do, but also what do the graphics settings do. This video has taught you. It's how much, when it's rendered in, not the quality of the image. So, yeah. Now let's move on to the last part, which is hardware. How hardware affects your FPS on Microsoft Flight Simulator. Sorry, may talk a bit loud there. I have a 4070 Ti and a 7800X3D. Pretty decent system. A 7800X3D is the best CPU for Flight Sim right now, as of when recording this video. That is meaning that if you had the same CPU with a 4090, you may get better FPS, you may not. Get the same CPU with a 3060, you may get the same FPS. It's not going to be better, is it? Because it's a worse GPU, but you know, you may. But the point I want to make is, you may find that your friend has a 3060 and you have a 4070. You both got the same CPU though, and you're thinking, well, why is my friend getting exactly the same numbers on the same settings? This is because the GPU is very limited in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Why? Because it's very limited on the CPU. The CPU, it can only use so much. This is because the CPU is very limited in the Microsoft Flight Simulator's internal code. The Microsoft Flight Simulator is limited the code of how much the CPU it can use. But what people are mistaken is it can only use one core. I want to show you if that's true or not. So I'm going to open something called Core Temp. Microsoft Core. It's not Microsoft, is it? Core Temp. And I'm going to stress out the CPU so much right now. So I'm going to head back to the airport. I am going to head right next to the PMDG plane. I am going to inject some traffic into the sim. I'm also going to make sure my terrain LODs are set to the maximum. I'm also going to, right. I want you to make a note of something. God, it's really hard to illustrate here. It really is. I want you to notice the CPU utilization at the top left of the screen. I also want you to notice the core usage on the Core Temp little program there at the left as well. Now, the CPU isn't really getting stressed here. To stress the CPU, you need to be at a busy airport, alright? But I didn't want to because it's going to make anomalies. As you can see, there isn't just one core being used at a time. Okay, one core is dominant, but that's not to say that the sim is single core entirely. You can see that I'm using 30% on core 1, but I'm sort of using 5% on another core, and then I've got a percent on a few other cores. So it is sort of using other cores. Now I will admit, yes, the game is limited on how many cores it can use. The internal code has ruined the CPU base, how much it can be used. And that's just Microsoft Flight Sim's internal code, which they must change, which they're not going to change until 2024 Microsoft Flight Sim. But the point I want to make is that it's not entirely using one core. That's a wrong analogy. But you aren't wrong in saying that the sim is very CPU limited. But I did just want to go over that. The sim isn't single core entirely. I'll do another video showing you this in more detail when I do an extras on this. I patch up on this video. Things I couldn't show on this very well. Now, as you can see, it's stuttering a bit. This is because I've put the terrain LEDs up. See, it's stuttering because I'm right next to the aircraft. The aircraft really makes the stutter worse, doesn't it? That's the thing I want to say. You know, the higher intensity of the aircraft, the more resources you need and the more FPS you drop. Anyways, I think that's made the video long enough. Well, actually, no, it hasn't. I need to go over something else. Now, how much is used on the? What about something else? Like I've talked about GPU and video memory. What about? I've talked about the CPU. What about the RAM? The RAM is something else which is quite significant in the sim. I have 32 gigs of mainboard RAM. This is DDR5 dual channel in 6000 megahertz with a cast latency of 30, and it is 6000 mega transfers a second. Not megahertz, it's mega transfers a second, but megahertz is what they call it on websites and things, so okay, megahertz if you want to call it that. I have found with testing, I can't show you this because I've got no way of showing you this. I can't see what goes on from my motherboard, so I can't show you this. If someone knows how you can get numbers coming out from your motherboard, do let me know. Like how much megahertz your RAM is using, and things like that. I have found that going from a 3200 megahertz RAM kit to a 6000 megahertz RAM kit, it made a difference in the sim. I had more stability in the sim, less lag issues, less FPS drops. So yeah, the higher the megahertz, the better, but not in a stupid way. You want to make sure that your cast latency is sort of, relatively decent for the megahertz. 6000 CL30 is fine because it's a nice low cast latency for the megahertz. Lower cast latency is better, by the way. Higher mega transfers a second or megahertz is better. So do make sure you know that, because people get confused with why cast latency is better lower. So yeah, higher megahertz does actually make a difference. Also, amounts of RAM. I found that if you have 16 gigs and you're in a high quality aircraft like the PMDG 737 even, and you're doing a flight, it might seem okay for so long, but if you're flying for like an hour or so, you'll find that eventually your game just starts to stutter eventually, and it just doesn't go back to normal. And this is because your RAM is being fully utilized. It's trying to render the world in a way, and 16 gigs is on the limits, so I recommend a minimum of 20 gigabytes of RAM if that's possible in a combination. And I also recommend it in dual channel, so 2 RAM sticks, 2 slots on the motherboard. It just gives the best FPS stability. I have 32 gigs for lots of leeway, but 20 gigs I'd say minimum. So yeah, do make a note of that. I found from a previous time that I had 16 gigs and I kept stuttering after a while in flights, and it happened every flight. So, and I found out upgrading the RAM just solved the issue. So yeah, that's something to note. And yeah, I think that's all the major stuff with hardware and software. Software is something which I would do as well. The more software you have open, the less stable your sim will be. So just don't have anything you don't need open in the background on your computer. It'll just help you out in stability. But yeah, I hope this has taught people something. and I am planning to do a patch-up video on this to illustrate a busier airport, so that you can see it in a bit more detail. So yeah, thanks for watching. I'm sorry for the long video, but I had lots to explain, and I do hope I will see you in another one. Bye guys.